Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Holes in Biodiversity Bill. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. We have the Environment Minister who had introduced Biological Diversity Amendment Bill of 2021 in the Parliament. This particular bill is now referred to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. They are looking into what this bill is, and in all likelihood they may also come up with some recommendation as well. So in this particular backdrop, we will try and understand what are the important features of this particular bill. We will also understand the associated concerns voiced by different experts as well as environmentalists. First up, we have to understand the background. We have one of the conventions called as Convention on Biological Diversity. This particular convention is informally also called as Biodiversity Convention. This convention has three important goals. What are these goals? One, it is for the conservation of biological diversity or the biodiversity. What is the biological diversity? There are different kinds of species that are present on the earth. Protecting them is the first major goal. The sustainable use of its components. Let's say for example, there is a plant species. So this particular plant will also have its sustainable uses. So making sure that this particular plant is also carried forward in the near future, its species is carried forward for the next generation. So the major goal is also about sustainable use. The third is the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the genetic resources. What do we understand by fair and equitable sharing? Let's say for example, there is one of the species of a plant. This plant has its own advantages. So there is a particular indigenous community, the tribal community, who know for the fact that there are some advantages from this particular plant. It can be used for reducing the fatigueness. It can be used for many other diseases curing as well. So whenever you are extracting such information from the indigenous community, they also should be provided with the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits. Since you are extracting their knowledge and using it for the commercial purposes, make sure that you also provide some benefits to the indigenous community. So all in all, the three major goals of this particular convention include conservation of the biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the genetic resources. It also covers biotechnology, where it is also included under the Cartagena Protocol on Biodiversity. It also includes all the ecosystems, species as well as the genetic resources, and it also takes into picture directly or indirectly anything that is associated with biodiversity. It can be the role of development, it can be science and its development, it can be politics or education or agriculture, it can be business, it can be culture. So any other field which has a direct play in the biodiversity is also linked to this convention on the biological diversity. And from the preliminary examination point of view, do note that the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity is based in Montreal in Canada. This is very important from the preliminary examination point of view. What are the functions of the Secretariat? Basically, it will implement the Convention on Biological Diversity. It will also run various programs as well. It will also draft documents as well, and it will coordinate with multiple international organizations, collect information about the biodiversity, and ultimately give it to the nation states. These are the functions of the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Biodiversity. And do note, one of the important objectives of this particular convention is to develop national strategies for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and it is often seen as the key document regarding the sustainable development. So what do you understand from this? As part of this particular convention, it is also pushing, encouraging countries, asking them to come up with their own national laws. India happens to be the signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity. When did it become the member? It became the member back in the year 1994. Since it became the member of this particular convention, India also had to comply by this particular convention. The objective of this particular convention is that it is asking that particular country to come up with its own national laws for the sustainable use of biological diversity, and as a result, India, being a signatory to this particular convention, came up with one of the acts called as the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. So India came up with this particular act. In this act, what you will have is the implementing agencies or the institute. So what do we have? We have three important institutes. At the national level, what we have is the National Biodiversity Authority. At the state level, what we have is the State Biodiversity Board, and at the local level, what we have is the Biodiversity Management Committee. What are the functions of these institutes which are present under this particular act? When you look at the National Biodiversity Authority, it advises the central government on matters relating to conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of its components, and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of biological resources. These are also the goals of the Convention of Biological Diversity. We did discuss about it. It also advises the state governments in the selection of areas of biodiversity importance to be notified, and it also measures the management of such heritage site. So which site has to be selected, how it has to be managed, its recommendation will also be given by the National Biodiversity Authority. The National Biodiversity Authority may, on the behalf of the central government, take any measures necessary to oppose the grant of intellectual property rights in any country outside India on any biological resource obtained from India or knowledge associated with such biological resource which is derived from India. What do we understand by this? Let me give you a simple example. We all use turmeric in our house. We know for the fact that this will also help in preventing some infections. But what exactly happens in United States of America or in any other country for that matter? They may use this traditional medicine that is associated with the Indian community as their own invention. So in this particular case, what we will have is the National Biodiversity Authority, which will put it before the government of India and says that United States of America is using our traditional knowledge and violating it. So it means if any other company of United States of America or any other country is filing intellectual property rights for this traditional knowledge, a constant check of it will be undertaken by the National Biodiversity Authority, and if it's get recognized, the same will be notified to the central government. So the central government can notify the same on the global community. So a constant monitoring of the traditional knowledge will be undertaken by the National Biodiversity Authority. What are the functions of the State Biodiversity Board? It will advise the state government subject to any guidelines issued by the central government on matters relating to conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of its components, equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of biological resources, regulate by granting of approvals or otherwise request for the commercial utilization or biosurvey or bioutilization of any biological resource by Indians. In case there are Indians and companies or organizations who want to explore a particular plant species or want to conduct an experiment in the forest areas with respect to one of the biological organisms or a species, it can be the plant as well, it can be an organism as well. In that particular case, permission will have to be given by the State Biodiversity Board. Then finally what we have is the Biodiversity Management Committee. Every local body shall constitute a Biodiversity Management Committee within its area for the purpose of promoting conservation, sustainable use and documentation of biological diversity, including preservation of habitats, conservation of land races, folk varieties and cultivars, domesticated stocks and breeds of animals and microorganisms, and chronicling of knowledge relating to biological diversity. What do we understand by this? Let's say for example, there are a group of people in a particular area. These people possess knowledge which any other community may not possess. So what is that this biodiversity management community has to do is it has to go and interact with them and document this particular knowledge as well. So documenting the local biodiversity and associated knowledge that is derived from such people is the major objective for this particular committee. So these are the functions and the implementation that is present under Biological Diversity Act. Now the most important question is, why did the central government come up with this particular bill? There has to be some flaw, there has to be some deficiency, there has to be some irregularity in the act, which is why the central government may have come up with this particular bill. So the amended bill was drafted in response to number of complaints, primarily from the traditional Indian medicine practitioners, the seed sector, the industry and researchers, that the act imposed heavy compliance burden and made it hard to conduct collaborative research and investments, and they also wanted to simplify patent application process. So because they felt that the patent application process was also complex and the traditional practitioners and the industry were not able to collaborate and they were not able to come up with their own inventions when it comes to this particular domain, the central government decides that they have to bring some amendments into this particular bill. Added to it, the text of the bill also says that it wants to widen the scope of levying access and benefit sharing with the local communities for the further conservation of the biological resources, which is why the central government came up with this particular legislation. So what are the major features of this particular bill? The bill amends the Biological Diversity Act of 2002 to simplify the compliance requirements for the domestic companies. Benefit sharing will be based on terms agreed between the user and the local management committee represented by the national authority, and the bill also decriminalizes all offences under the act. What do we understand by this? Under the earlier act, that is the Biological Diversity Act of 2002, in case a person violates some of the provisions, in that particular case, he would be put behind bars. He can be arrested. He can be sentenced to a particular imprisonment period as well. But in this particular case, everything has been decriminalized, which means that particular person will not be arrested. Instead, a heavy penalty or fine would be imposed on such a person violating the provisions of this particular bill. So these are the major features of this particular legislation. This is where there are multiple concerns that are associated according to some environmentalists as well as experts. What are the major concerns? When you look into the act, it says under section 7, prior intimation to the state biodiversity board for obtaining biological resource for certain purposes. So if an organization or a person who is a citizen or a body corporate, association or organization which is registered in India shall obtain any biological resource for commercial utilization, biosurvey, bioutilization for commercial utilization, except after giving prior intimation to the state biodiversity board concerned, provided that provisions of this section shall not apply to local people and communities of the area, including growers and cultivators of biodiversity and vets and hakims who have been practicing indigenous medicine. What do we understand by this? If there is an organization, if there is an industrial body, if there is a scientific unit, this scientific unit goes up to the forest. They feel there is a particular type of grass, there is a particular type of plant, there is a particular type of species from which certain advantages or certain ingredients can be extracted which can be commercially explored. In that particular case, they had to take the permission from the state biodiversity board. This is for all those who want to make use of it for the commercial purposes. But if there are people who are growers of that particular species, that is a plant variety, or if there are people in that particular area who have been using it for their local uses, in that particular case, they need not have to take the state biodiversity board approval. But if it is for the commercial purposes, what they should do? They should ideally take the permission from the state biodiversity board. But this particular bill seeks to exempt the registered Ayush medical practitioners and people accessing codified traditional knowledge, among others, from giving prior intimation to the state biodiversity boards for accessing biological resources for certain purposes. This basically means in the earlier act, which the act continues to be, in that case, permission was required from the state biodiversity board. In the bill, what happens? The Ayush medical practitioners as well as some of the codified traditional knowledge, they need not have to take the permission from the state biodiversity board, which basically means that you have the central government with this particular legislation which is clearly compartmentalizing two sections of the people. One is the Ayush medical practitioners, and at the same time you also have the company as well. So the company will still have to go ahead and will have to take the permission from the state biodiversity board, but exemption has been given to the Ayush medical practitioners. This basically means that it is too broad, and it may also lead to biopiracy as well, is some of the concerns. Now the question is, what is this biopiracy? Let's say there is one of the indigenous community, or there is one of the local tribal community. They have a particular source of knowledge about a particular plant species, so no benefits would be accorded to such people, but instead everything will be commercialized by that particular entity. So few of the people basically believe that because the registered Ayush medical practitioners are given this exemption, they may engage in biopiracy, which happens to be the first major concern. The second major concern is people accessing codified traditional knowledge. But the question here is, what is this codified traditional knowledge is yet not defined in this particular bill. It is too broad a definition, and this also could lead to violation of the rule of law as well. And the third major concern is the bill decriminalizes all offenses under this act. Whenever we speak about a particular legislation, it will have certain period of imprisonment, and it will also have fine as well. Now with this particular imprisonment provision completely deleted, only fines that are present, this will not have any deterrent effect. In case there is imprisonment, in that case there would be deterrent effect. This should obviously stop certain perpetrators or violators of this particular provision, and it may stop them from committing such an offense because they will be imprisoned. But now what would happen? Only fine is present, so they would be ready to pay the fine. Even if it is in lakhs, they would pay the fine as well, and ultimately they would not have any deterrent effect, is the major problem. And this happens to be another major concern. Added to it, what we also have is the major problem is that we have the National Biodiversity Authority, and some of the powers that have been given to the National Biodiversity Authority have also been diluted. So these are some of the issues and concerns with respect to this legislation. Apart from these concerns that are directly associated with the bill should have also addressed some of the other concerns which were present in the act. What are the other concerns? There was no data available, barring a few states, on the money received from the companies and traders for access and benefit sharing from use of traditional knowledge and resources. What do we understand by this? Let's say, for example, I run a company. I, as a person, when I'm running a company, I'm making use of the local knowledge. I've extracted information from the local community. If they have given me some information, as per the Indian law, Indian pharmaceutical companies are required to pay between 3 to 5% on the extracted bioresources, or between 0.01 to 0.05 on the annual gross ex factory sales. So if I run a company, if I'm making profits, if I'm running it for the commercial purposes, if they have given, the local community have given this information, I should ideally provide them certain remuneration. I should provide them certain benefits. I should provide them certain loyalty fee as well. But in most cases, this is not being done. In fact, in some of the cases, it is hardly given as well. This should have been addressed, but unfortunately, the bill doesn't even take it into picture. Let me also give you two examples. We have the Irula tribes. The Irula cooperative in Tamil Nadu have the traditional knowledge holders of the method of collecting snake venom, which is used for the pharmaceutical products. Only one company had agreed to pay, but even that promise remained unfulfilled. We have the Irula tribe. The Irula tribe are known for catching the snakes and collecting the venom, and this particular venom can be used for coming up with anti-venoms as well, and it can also be used for pharmaceuticals as well. But in this particular case, they have taken information from the Irula tribe, and these companies should have paid them some money, but in this case, they have not paid. In fact, one of the companies had promised to pay them, but even that particular company had not paid them as well. Let me give you another example. Kani tribe in the southern Kerala Kerala. They are known for their knowledge of anti-fatigue properties of the wonder herb called as Arogya Pacha, whose scientific name is Trichopus zelenakis, that grows in their forest. But in this particular case as well, some of the benefits which should have been accorded to them is yet not accorded. So this particular bill, which was about recreating some of the deficient provisions with respect to the Biological Diversity Act of 2002, should have taken all this into picture, but instead of collecting this information, addressing the loopholes that are already prevalent in this particular legislation, it has hit the major part of that particular legislation, which could ultimately harm the local community. Is what is this article all about? It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, has Kerala changed its stance on national education policy? The article here is speaking about issues and concerns associated with the national education policy from the viewpoint of the Kerala government. We have the government of India, which came up with the national education policy in the year 2020. According to it, it said that this will be of advisory nature, which means it is not compulsory for the state governments to implement it, adapt it and implement as part of their education policy, but instead it will be advisory in nature. However, the central government did not impose it, but also said that you can make use of these schemes, you can make use of such a policy in the state level when you are drafting your own education policy. The state government of Kerala did look into this national education policy and was not happy with the national education policy. So what does it do? It appoints one of the councils. So the Kerala State Higher Education Council constituted a committee chaired by noted economist Prabhat Patnaik, who concluded that the policy is retrograde and presented an exclusionary vision of education. So according to the Kerala government and according to the recommendation made by economist Prabhat Patnaik, they said that this national education policy of 2020 was exclusionary in nature. It did not look at the reservation picture in Kerala. It did not serve the purpose of social justice, equity, as well as access to the education, and it also felt that it aligns the country's education policy with the needs of the private investment and techno capitalism. When we look at the Kerala government basically believes that education has to be provided by the government. More investments will have to be provided by the government. But when you look into the national education policy, according to Prabhat Patnaik committee recommendation, it said that in this particular case, the central government may be promoting private investments as well as techno capitalism, which is against the value system established by the Kerala government. The move also permitted multiple entry and exit in the academic programs, which also feared to legitimize dropouts. What do we understand by this? Let's say, for example, if you are taking forward a particular degree, let's say a BA degree or a BCom degree or any of the degrees. So according to the new national education policy, for a prescribed number of years, this particular person would be also be able to exit from particular degree and also come back to the same degree after number of years as well. So this, according to the Kerala government, felt that in this particular case, since this particular provision is given, this will ultimately increase the number of dropouts over a period of time. And the National Research Foundation and the Board of Governance of the higher education institutions would also kill the democratic spirit of universities and their autonomy, which is why the Kerala government felt that the national education policy was not in line according to the education policies of the Kerala government. However, of late, some of the provisions of the national education policy are in line and in tune with the policies of the Kerala government's vision. What is the Kerala government's vision? They have come up with what is called as Nava Kerala, which happens to be the vision document presented by Chief Minister Vijayan, which mooted private investments in the higher education. When we look into the recommendation of the national education policy, it also pushed for the private investments. But the present Kerala government recommendation under the Nava Kerala also speaks about private investments as well. So some of the ideas and the recommendations which it had opposed initially, the same is also being recommended in this particular vision document. Added to it, they are also exploring the possibility of establishing an education city in Kerala, to offer courses in collaboration with the foreign universities. The same had also been recommended by the National Education Policy. Initially, they felt that the National Education Policy is retrograde and happens to have an exclusionary vision, but over a period of time, some of the aspects of National Education Policy have also become part of the Kerala education policy as well. But why is Kerala looking at this particular picture? That is because, according to it, Kerala government feels that in the past few years, Kerala government has been able to increase the number of children who are able to educate themselves, who are able to give quality education at the school level. They are one among the top performings in the schools as well at the national level. But when it comes to higher education, there is a lot of brain drain in this particular states. There are not much universities, there are not much research centers. Even if there are present universities, what is happening? There is extreme politicization. These universities are not given enough power as well, and there is management course as well. There are too many restrictions imposed on the university, and at the same time, they are not given free license to act on their own to bring about new initiatives for the research and development. All of these were the major impediments when it comes to Kerala. So, to revamp this entire higher education program, what they are now planning to introduce is to give more scope to the private investments as well as to collaborate with the foreign universities. Despite this recommendation, there are major obstacles for the implementation. What are these major obstacles? One, despite having adopted a pragmatic stance towards the National Education Policy 2020, the government is yet to frame guidelines on implementing its provisions in the state. By adapting some of the provisions in a direct and an indirect way, the problem being is, how are we going to execute it? Who will be the implementing agency? What will be the guidelines? Who will hold what powers will have to be given by the state governments. This is yet not notified by the state governments, and various logistical issues such as creating new posts that would burden the state exchequer amid the fiscal crunch that have also put a spanner in the works as well. So this basically means that because it will also hit the expenses of the state government is as of now little reluctant to come up with such a recommendation and its implementation. So going forward, what we will have is Kerala government which will be coming up with these initiatives, and even if they are not coming up with this initiative, they have to keep a constant check to reform the educational sector in their state, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, when a nip and tuck goes awry. The article here is speaking about the exponential growth of aesthetic and cosmetic surgery field. It is estimated that this particular field is worth about 460 crores. And why are we discussing this? That is because there was a recent incident that took place in Bengaluru where a 21-year-old television actor who underwent liposuction, which happens to be a body contouring procedure, died at a private facility in Bengaluru. So this particular article basically speaks about the medical issues concerning the cosmetic industry, the ethical issues concerning the cosmetic industry, what are the concerns and lacunae and regulating issues within this particular sector, and some of the recommendations to overcome this particular issue. First, what we have to understand is, what is this cosmetic surgery? This is a surgical expertise that aims at correcting or improving body imperfections. There are two viewpoints to this particular cosmetic surgery. One, a particular person has some issue. This particular issue can be genetic in nature, or this can be because of some illness, or this can be because of some trauma, or because of some psychological event like accident, so on. So during this particular period, a person would have suffered an imperfection, and correcting this imperfection is part of the cosmetic surgery. So this is a legitimate purpose. However, there are also patients who also want to improve their appearance. In such a case, they also go to the cosmetic surgeon. If we look into the statistics, data from the International Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery shows that there are about 5,24,064 aesthetic procedures, surgical and non-surgical, which are carried out in India in the year 2020. So this basically means that what we are seeing is an exponential rise in the cosmetic surgery industry. Why is this industry flourishing? That is because individuals of late have become too self-conscious. This is also because of the image-driven social media as well. Added to it, there are continuous advertisements that are put out, and even if people do not have the money, there are no cost EMIs that are associated with them. There is dropping facility that is provided to the patients as well, and in all these cases, there are also fake advertisements that are given to the men as well as women, which has led to mushrooming of number of clinics even without the licenses. So what are the concerns associated with this industry? Clinics mushrooming without any quality control. There is lax legislation and implementation, incorrect advertisement centers with no hospital backup. So this basically means ideally there has to be one of the institutions which looks into whether that particular saloon or that particular hospital or that particular institute which is offering this particular service, are they following a standard prescribed model? If they are not following, the licenses that are accorded to them should be completely cancelled. But in most of the cases, there are no institutes, there are no legislations, there are no authorities to look into it, and in fact, saloons are also offering hair transplant as well. Who is monitoring them? There is lax legislation and implementation. In fact, incorrect advertisements are also the main issue. Added to it, even if these advertisements are given in the saloons, is there an as hospital that they are associated to? No. These have become the major concerns when it comes to some cosmetic surgery. In order to overcome this particular issue, what is that we have to do? We have to introduce some form of accreditation for the dermatology clinics. Recently, the Delhi High Court has directed the center as well as the Delhi government for framing of medical protocols at national level for guidance of medical practitioners doing aesthetic surgeries. This happened in Delhi. Why? Because there was one of a person who goes up to the salon. He wants to take care of the hair transplantation, but this was done by unqualified people, and over a period of time after this particular hair transplantation happened, this particular person goes back home and there are side effects that immediately pictures in. So because of the side effects, he goes up to the hospital was not able to take care of him, and ultimately this person passes away. So a case is filed in the Delhi High Court, and the Delhi High Court has now directed the center government as well as the state government to come up with the regulation for this particular sector. This particular issue also exposes the unneeded, unjustified risk. For example, the risk of infection, risk of anesthesia, side effects, and this can also result in death of a particular person as well. So going forward, what we have to do is we have to educate the patients to make the informed choices. So what is this informed choice? What is this informed consent? What is this appropriate disclosure? Whenever a particular person goes to a hospital or to a clinic or to an institute to get the hair transplant or to a cosmetic surgeon for the cosmetic surgery, in that particular case, all the possible side effects should be given to this particular person. When we say all, literally everything, every side effects should be given to this particular person, that in case you do go through this particular procedure, this could be the possible repercussions. Even if some of them are withheld, this particular person who's conducted that particular surgery or that particular hair transplantation should be immediately be prosecuted. So going forward, all these recommendations will have to be implemented, and the person who is entering into this will also be informed about that particular surgery or the procedure, and consent of that individual will also have to be taken as well. In most of the cases, it has to be only performed by the qualified persons, and a standard protocol will have to be established, and all those self mushrooming underqualified, if they are present in that particular city, the same will have to be taken into picture by the police officers, and they should ultimately bring an end to such saloons as well. So the doctors in the near future should not accept to the patient request if it is having some side effects which they cannot control. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article is only from the preliminary examination point of view, which says that new species of snake found in Meghalaya. So remember, there is one of the species called as Trimercerosis maye, and this happens to be a snake. Where was it discovered? It was discovered in Meghalaya. So remember, the Trimercerosis maye happens to be a snake which is found in Meghalaya, Mizoram, and even in Guwahati, which happens to be one of the prominent places in Assam. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about one of the creeks called as the Kori Creek. Where is this Kori Creek? This is once again important from the preliminary examination point of view. This is present in the Kutch region as shown in this particular image, and it is part of Gujarat. This can also be important from the places in news point of view. So remember, Kori Creek happens to be in Kutch in the state of Gujarat. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Discuss the points of contention raised by experts on the Biological Diversity Amendment Bill of 2021. Discuss the medical and ethical issues involved in aesthetic and reconstructive surgery. So please write all your answers on the comment section. You can also visit our website. The same questions will be posted on our website. You would be able to write and upload an image on our website as well. So please do visit our website, upload an image if you wish to, discuss and also provide positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.